Rebecca, I think you're on mute.
Hi, good morning, and welcome to Covestro's THINC30 Tank on creating circular economy communities. I'm Rebecca Lucor with Covestro's CSR and sustainability team here in the US, and I'll be your host today. For those of you who are new to the THINC30 community, THINC30 is a project we started in 2017 to bring the 17 global United Nations Sustainable Development Goals home to our local community stakeholders so they could use them to reach their own sustainability goals in social, economic, and environmental equity. So our region could help build capacity in organizations already doing great work in these areas and to forge new partnerships and discussions. And today we're going to be exploring how circular economic principles can help us further achieve those goals and also confront some of the biggest challenges before us, like the fact that the global population is expected to soar beyond 9 billion people by 2050, with as many as 2/3 moving to cities. That will put enormous stresses on things like consumption, pollution, water, energy, and climate. We live in a world of endless possibilities but dwindling resources. Circularity is a way to alleviate the burden on natural resources while driving economic growth. It replaces the traditional linear economy, which takes, makes, and wastes, into circular ones that reuse, recycles, and repairs. It minimizes the disposal of waste and the need for raw materials by keeping the waste and those materials in the production cycle. We're excited today to have some of the greatest leading thinkers and doers in circularity who will be looking at the issue in a very holistic way. There are so many industries and entities that play a role here. That's because waste is created from so many different streams. Whether it's excess food or plastics and packaging or construction and building debris or carbon dioxide created from all kinds of manufacturing processes, so much of it turns into greenhouse gases, which we know accelerates climate change. So the question before us today is, how do we as countries, cities, companies, and citizens take that waste and keep using it over and over again? We've got international, national, and local experts who are going to help us answer those questions. We'll learn why circularity is critical to meeting our long-term sustainability as a planet, people, and as organizations, whether they're businesses, nonprofits, cities, communities, or academic institutions. We'll examine which circular economy priority areas that have some of the greatest impact on climate change. We'll find out how college and universities around the country are embedding circular economy into their teaching and research programs. And we'll learn how specific cities have begun their circularity journeys and just how well poised Pittsburgh itself is to become a circular economy hub. And we'll explore the industries that hold the most promise for transforming from linear to circular and how some companies are already doing it. Industry like plastics, food, fashion, construction, and carbon capture industry. As one of the world's leading producers of advanced polymers and high-performance plastics, we at Covestro have a huge responsibility in this work, and we're committed to doing so, as you'll hear from my colleagues, Lynette Chung and Richard Skorpensky. Okay, before we hear from our first speaker, just a few reminders. Today will run about 2.5 hours. The panels will include time for audience Q&A. Please, you can submit your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom. And also, we encourage engagement among the attendees throughout the chat box throughout the morning. So let's jump right in. Our first speaker today is Andrew McHugh. Coming from a background in sustainable urban food systems, Andrew works in systems thinking, an Amsterdam-based agency Metabolic, as a circular economy consultant. His current area of focus are circular cities, including Philadelphia, Boulder, Cleveland, and Cambridge, regenerative food systems, and packaging. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for having me. I do have a couple of slides here. Wondering if I can pull them up on my screen and we can get started. Okay, so just going to try and set the table a little bit for this panel discussion we're about to have. All right, I see we have doubled up on the slide, so I will take mine down. I'm going to try to set the table for our discussion on circular cities. I think a couple of little graphics that I have here will make it a little bit easier. First thing I want to bring up is the transition from a linear economy to a circular economy. So the basics that we should all have in mind for this event is that the linear economy is taking material or resources from landscapes, from mines, from whatever it might be, making them into products. And then when we are done with one use of those products, or two uses or three uses of them, the byproducts or the remaining material is just put out of sight, out of mind. Right now, that is waste management services sort of collect that from our front doorsteps and take them out of sight, often to material recovery facilities or MRFs, where even more material is lost before what can be recycled is recovered. A circular economy is often misunderstood as a zero waste economy or a recycling economy. The circular economy is really not just about creating zero waste. It's about reimagining how the whole system works so that we're making the maximum use of our resources. It's actually extremely economical because you're getting the maximum value out of every resource or material that you use. Now, I think it can't be understated how much of a shift in our systems and supply chains and built environment this is. But what does this mean for cities? In cities, you can't just be looking at the waste management perspective. You have to be taking an integrated approach. As we heard, more than 2/3 of the population is going to be moving into cities. So if we think about the traditional definition of a circular economy in which all materials are reused, that's insufficient to have a happy city, right? Just no waste is not sufficient for a perfectly circular city. So the approach that we need is more integrated. We need to be considering the materials that are cycled at high value, creating zero waste, but we also need to ensure our energy is coming from renewable resources, that water is extracted and used at a reusable rate, at a sustainable rate, that biodiversity is structurally, not just occasionally supported, but structurally baked into our systems, but also that more social and human factors like society and culture, health and well-being, and value other than just financial value are being created and supported. In cities, we already know that cities are the drivers of the global economy. They have the majority of the population, the majority of GDP, and they're growing over time. The major thing we need to know about cities, and I just want to make sure I get this graphic right, so one moment. The thing we really need to get right about cities is they are currently acting as parasites on the landscape. So what do I mean by that? Cities consume 3% of the global land surface, but 75% of its resources. They produce between 60 and 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So if we need to move to a circular economy, cities are the places we should probably be looking first because they take all these resources in, they create a lot of value locally, but they don't give it back to where it was extracted from, so you can't close those loops. But on the other hand, cities are exceptional centers of knowledge and convening and equipment and capacity and funding. So they also represent the best opportunity to start building out a circular economy. Now, today, I want to talk with three wonderful guests from Pittsburgh about how Pittsburgh could really be leading the way towards a circular economy, how it can become a leading circular hub in North America and in the world. My first guest is Dr. Melissa Bilek. She's the Deputy Director of the Mascaro Center for Sustainable Innovation at the University of Pittsburgh. We also have Mr. Mike Gable, who is the Executive Director of Construction Junction, and Mr. Grant Irvin, who serves as Pittsburgh's Chief Resilience Officer. As a city and a region, Pittsburgh does have much to be proud of in terms of where they are in sustainability and the fact that it's one of only 2 cities in the US that have officially adopted the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a roadmap. I know that together, the three of you have been working on circular economy initiatives and the idea of working to make Pittsburgh a circular economy hub in the US. Please welcome our three guests. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our discussion. I have a question first for each of the panelists individually, and then we'll have a bit more of a group discussion. My first question is for Melissa. Melissa, I just wanted to ask you to tell us a bit more about how the idea of Pittsburgh as a circular economy hub and leader came about, how it's related to your work at U of Pitt, and perhaps I heard there's even the involvement of a National Science Foundation grant. I'd love to hear a bit of the origin story of this idea.
So thank you so much, Andrew. And it's so nice to see Grant and Mike. I feel like we've been a squad over the last year, so it's good to be here together. So thank you for the question, Andrew. And I'll say, in September of 2020, my team and I worked to assemble over 100 experts over 3 days to really establish the research and training mission around this theme called Design for a Circular Economy from Molecules to the Built Environment. And this workshop was funded by the National Science Foundation Convergence Accelerator Program. And that program, if you aren't familiar with it, is really intended to integrate teams of industry, academics, nonprofits, and government entities to really solve use-inspired and application-oriented problems. And so, of course, circular economy is definitely within that vein. And I will say this is a very different program for the National Science Foundation. So during the month of our discussions, it really became clear to me that Pittsburgh could truly serve as a circular economy hub. And so I'm a person that grew up in Pittsburgh, and I care deeply about the region. I worked on the trails, I worked on the Hot Metal Bridge, and I worked at the Urban Redevelopment Authority for 7 years. And I really started to think about how our region could be the leader in the US. And of course, I contacted my co-panelists, Grant and Mike, and we kind of started on our journey. And so one of my mentors taught me that it's important to put your goals into the universe and keep saying them. So we keep saying that Pittsburgh is going to be the circular economy hub in the US. We still have a long way to go, but I really think we're working to build on our dreams.
Beautiful. I love that. Definitely something that has worked for me as well. I've heard that from my mentors, to put your goals out into the universe and they come back. Moving on to Mike, to learn a little bit more about your work in Pittsburgh. I understand Construction Junction was way ahead of the curve in terms of thinking about circular thinking and in the built environment in particular. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the work you've been doing to create a deconstruction industry, how it came about and where it is today.
Thanks, Grant. It's great to be here. It's great to see Andrew. It's great to see Grant and Melissa. We have been doing a lot of discussions around this topic. Construction Junction, for those of you who may not know, is a nonprofit used and surplus building material reuse retailer. We were launched in 1999 by the Pennsylvania Resources Council to address the issue of building material waste, which comprises about 25% of the waste stream. It's a huge volume, a huge quantity, generates a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of that material can be recycled and reused. And Construction Junction really addresses that, like 25% of the 600 million tons of construction waste that's not concrete or asphalt that can't be ground up. We really address the building material components of the waste stream: doors, windows, trim, plumbing fixtures, even getting into furnishings and file cabinets and things like that, which we're really seeing kind of a tsunami of that material as our office spaces are changing, our retail environments are changing, and there needs to be a place for all of that. And traditionally, that place has really been the landfill. And we are working very diligently to create an alternative to this solid waste infrastructure where we've made it really inexpensive to throw things away. We've made it really easy to throw things away. Who then bears responsibility for the responsible use of materials? Who keeps that material in use? And we do that in several ways. You can drop materials off to construction junction. We send a truck out to job sites and we pick up material. And then we have a crew that will go out and pull material out of buildings before they're demolished. And that's what we refer to as salvage and deconstruction. And we are a long way from being able to use that term deconstruction industry. We've got to create an infrastructure that really promotes and facilitates the reuse of material. And the two other colleagues on the panel, their institutions are taking big steps to do that. We work a lot with the University of Pittsburgh and their contractors when they do renovations. The city of Pittsburgh has just launched an executive order that they are going to explore the potential of deconstruction and evaluating buildings before they demolish the city-funded properties that get demolished, to evaluate those properties for their reuse potential. And we think that everybody that's doing a building project, a renovation project, regardless of scale, needs to be evaluating their project for reusable materials, just like they would evaluate for asbestos abatement and other health and safety issues. Reuse has to be a priority, and we need to measure it, because if we don't measure it, it's not going to happen.
Love that, Mike. Yeah, reuse absolutely has to be up on the agenda. And once we measure it, we can start to manage it. You mentioned that you got an executive order from the city recently to consider deconstruction. That moved me nicely right into the next question, which is for Grant. Working with the city, can you tell us a bit more about your vision for a circular Pittsburgh, and how do the different kinds of partnerships like the one you have with Construction Junction build towards that vision?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Melissa and Mike. Good to see everyone. So the city of Pittsburgh, I would say we have been on a bit of an odyssey over the last 6+ years with regards to the topic of the circular economy. And it really, frankly, comes back to a series of workshops and listening sessions that we were doing with the community back in 2014, 2015, around the topic of bioenergy. So really thinking about how we can use or eliminate issues like food waste and other types of organic materials. And one of the things that we discovered with that, and that workshop was preparatory for our work for the Pittsburgh Climate Action Plan 3.0, was that we have a core group of organizations here in Pittsburgh that are already working on this topic of what is used to be called recovery or recycling or repurposing, and the circular economy is starting to encompass all of that. And so organizations like Mike and Melissa's, or new companies like Doors Unhinged or Thread, or longstanding kind of Pittsburgh stalwarts like Global Links or 412 Food Rescue or Alcoa and Covestro, have all been involved in kind of this rethinking of materials and how materials can be repurposed to new aims. And so we felt that there is a core competency, if you will, here in the region that can build on that. And our original kind of portion of the journey was really thinking of this from the environmental lens. So about 1% of our greenhouse gas emissions are related to waste, probably a little bit more when you factor in kind of transportation and that cross section of it, and how we move waste around the region. And so for us, that has a huge impact on city operations. So for example, we're sending our most polluting vehicles, our garbage and refuse packers, out to landfill for 30, 40 mile round trips. So how do you start to reduce that trip impact? And then one way is have less waste. The other is to change the fuel type and the vehicle type. And so that starts us to think in a more holistic and systemic way with regards to, waste reduction and repurposing, but also the transportation impacts. And so how we change vehicles and fuel types. And so we're on that path right now. But the other thing that I would say has been really interesting has been starting to work with organizations such as yourself at Metabolic or companies like Circle Economy or the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and starting to seek out this guidance that is starting to take shape around the world and bring those lessons here to Pittsburgh. So I think it was actually through a German Marshall Fund exchange that our former director, Deborah Lamb, took to Amsterdam, where we actually connected with Metabolic for the first time. And so that starts to open up kind of our thinking with regards to regulatory reform that's happening in the EU or systemic analysis that's required to help improve the decision support tools that we have within city government. Most recently, we had an opportunity to be a part of a 10-city exchange with the Swedish Embassy back in February of 2020. And it was really an enlightening experience for all of the US cities in terms of what is happening in other places, in terms of not thinking of waste as waste, but thinking of that waste as an asset. And those assets are the building blocks for economic development activity. And so that's really started to transform our thinking with projects like the Marshall Plan for Middle America and thinking about the region as a circular ecosystem. So whether that is, waste recovery, as we're, talking about it in building materials, or thinking about it in terms of the automotive industry, there's a connected tissue within the region that we can start to bring together in a more formative way.
Beautiful. I love that. And certainly what we see in our work at Metabolic is that if you're talking circular economy at a building or neighborhood or city level, certain things are possible. You're able to close some material loops, but not all. Once you expand it to the metropolitan region, the state, perhaps even the broader national region, much more is possible within that circular ecosystem. What we often see in that case is that different neighborhoods or cities or regions might take on a specialization. And this brings me back to Melissa. When you're having that idea of Pittsburgh can be the circular economy leader, what stood out to you as sort of the biggest strengths or assets already at Pittsburgh's disposal that make it very well placed to become a CE hub?
Yeah, thank you. And I do think in Pittsburgh, we have the foundation already. And in some ways, we're already doing circular economy work. We just really need to make that connection, whether it's an infrastructure connection or policy or through measurement. But think about the areas. We have the food sector through 412 Food Rescue. We have strong building sectors through Construction Junction and the Green Building Alliance. And we have some really innovative startups. So for example, Day Owl is just one of the example of a great startup in the region. I also think that we're a connected community. We've been supported by our philanthropic efforts. And I think this connection is key to circular economy work. I also like to think that Pittsburghers are competitive, including me. And we have this really strong work ethic and an innovative spirit to make Pittsburgh the circular economy hub. But because we are competitive, it's important to recognize that other cities, including Cleveland, are making significant advances in circular economy. So our timing now is critical. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention our intellectual capital to help realize the circular economy potential. So my home university, the University of Pittsburgh Mascaro Center for Sustainable Innovation, has really worked to advance some of the important design principles of circular economy. The reality is that unless we design in a new way, we are not going to be able to really think about the innovative promises of circular economy. So for example, one of my colleagues, Eric Beckman, is really thinking about how we can make a reversible plastic so it can be easily disassembled.
Really cool. And on that concept of design, this is part of the shift in focus of the circular economy from looking at diversion and waste to waste generation in the first place. Why do we have waste? What are we designing our products like? In the built environment, this becomes very important because buildings last for 10, 20, 100, whatever years before they're taken apart. So if we're trying to get to zero waste in the near future, we already need to start changing how we design our cities and our buildings and our infrastructure. I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit of how design plays into the opportunity to deconstruct or not a building, how valuable it might be to you.
So while I am not an architect or designer by any stretch, I have the opportunity to observe buildings. I have the opportunity every day to observe materials that come into construction junction. And I've recently had the interesting adventure to go and spend half of the day at a transfer station outside of Millvale that is operated by it's a family business, and they are interested in, basically, I'm going to call this the transfer station hack. How do we take transfer stations and actually have them focused on how do we remove reusable materials from the waste stream? And a lot of that is dependent on how those facilities are designed and how they're and the investment that goes into them. I also, every day we, and that's taboo, I guess, for me to say this, but every day we throw materials away that come to construction junction because they're made from pressed board, particle board. And this is that question about, not only do materials need to be designed for durability and longevity, because when those come into construction junction, there's a market for those. That's what people are looking for. But when pressed board and particle board and lower quality materials come in, those don't have longevity. Those can't be used multiple times and have the staying power. So those products need to be designed more durable in the first place, but also when people are buying things, they need to think, to the degree that they can, how durable is the product? How is it put together? We've just recently received a ton of dorm room furniture from a company that every component, every panel of the piece of furniture has been screwed. There's no glue in any of it. So if somebody decides they don't want to use that armoire or that desk for that purpose anymore, they can take it apart and they can use the components for something else. We don't see a lot of furniture like that, but we need to see it. And the same way with houses and the way that buildings are constructed in terms of how they're put together, what kinds of adhesives are used. Are you constantly paneling over? Like, we look at a lot of older properties and they've got insul brick and all kinds of stuff paneled over them. And by the time you get down to that usable material, it's no longer usable, basically.
Yeah.
So
those are a couple of the points that I hear all the time in the built environment. One is adhesives and fasteners, and the other is in the design for sort of modularity. If you think about sort of retail spaces that change over every 2 years, designing those counters, those fixtures to be reassembled or rearranged. This is increasingly coming into vogue with prefab houses. I want to move the question on to Grant's perspective here on the city's perhaps unique strengths, but also maybe where does it need the most work? What areas, dare we call it a weakness, you see in Pittsburgh?
Our weaknesses are our strengths. One of the things I think that's been really interesting for us in this journey has been the role of procurement. And so, just like what Mike is explaining at the household level, companies, business entities make purchasing decisions. And we have the power to influence those purchasing decisions by effectively designing the specs or the requirements that we put into tenders or solicitations that we're requesting for a service. A good example of that, where we've started to tie that together, was recently, or if you're a Pittsburgh resident, you've probably had a blue recycling bin has landed on your porch or your stoop to be used. And the purpose of that is basically to help improve the quality of the materials that we are collecting. And so we recognized, through a lot of kind of our integrated work, that one of our major weaknesses was that the point of collection. And so the blue bags that many of us Pittsburghers have become accustomed to using to collecting our recycling was actually a real detriment to the system in terms of literally kind of gumming up the works of our municipal recovery facility, or ultimately decreasing the quality of the materials that were coming out of the MRF. And so we were able to change that, or are in the process of changing it through the bin collection system. But one of the interesting things that we did as a part of that tender was actually make sure that the bins themselves were constructed from recovered material. So that's that kind of integrating the thinking in terms of the holistic loop. We were trying to get it from our recovered material. So we didn't get it that close, but we're working on it for maybe future endeavors. But really that type of thinking at the institutional level or the organizational level is just as important as, what we see at the household level. And then what that does is it really encourages people, like Eric Beckman at Pitt, Melissa's colleague, to help people to design those products and materials in a way that can meet the standards that the marketplace is requiring. And so that's really, I think, part of kind of the give and take that we're working on creating, is creating that demand for a more circular approaches or materials, and then incorporating it into our purchasing habits. So that's one thing that I would offer up there. Excellent.
Well, I think there's several questions that we can perhaps get to in a moment. But before we jump into all the live questions, I want to give Melissa a chance to jump in and add anything that's come up in the meantime. And then I have one more question. Melissa, were there any strengths or weaknesses besides the connectivity, anything that hasn't been mentioned yet?
The one thing I would like to stress is that in addition to the academic institutions in the region, the healthcare sector can really contribute to circular economy goals. When you think about all of the single-use plastics that are used in the healthcare sector, we really have an opportunity in this region to also be a leader. And we do, again, have nonprofits to support that, like Grant had mentioned, in terms of global links. But, I really would like to see and to foster greater collaboration with that sector.
Excellent. So I'm going to jump into a few of the Q&A questions now. Certainly, there are some challenging questions in here. Jumping back into the municipal economics with Grant, Rachel writes to us that recycling costs are often higher than landfill tipping fees. And where is that extra cost being paid for from? She suggests either taxes on new material or subsidies for recycling, but this is a real economics problem. I've also seen this in Colorado. Tipping fees are tiny, and they've started to add a little fee to create a fund for greater diversion, the Front Range Waste Diversion Fund. It still doesn't quite tip the balance in favor of recycled material over landfill. Where are you in this sort of thinking in Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity for that is really looking at the state of Pennsylvania increasing their tipping fee. It's one of these fees that creates an artificial bottom with regards to the disincentive to act properly, and creates a huge opportunity for us to effectively generate revenue that can support the infrastructure of this system. So Pennsylvania is a net importer of waste. So a large amount of our landfills are actually supported through places like New Jersey, New York, Maryland, and surrounding states. And so, finding that way to increase that fee, I think, starts to adjust some of those economics, and that raised revenue can start to effectively invest in this infrastructure. There's actually a lot of precedents for that. So probably a little over 10 years ago, the state of Pennsylvania threw a bond issue on utilizing the tipping fee. An increase in the tipping fee created the Growing Greener Bond Initiative, which was ultimately used for a lot of environmental reclamation activities, which have been well served. And so what I would say is that that's a big opportunity for Pennsylvania's municipalities as well as industry to benefit in terms of changing the economics of the system.
Awesome. And Melissa, there's a question that I'd love to get your perspective on. Circular economy is an emerging buzzword, certainly in the corporate world, but sort of generally, it's not really baked into people's consciousness. The question here is, how do you suggest to educate both consumers and manufacturers around these topics?
Yeah, so I think that's a really challenging question, Andrew. So in terms, part of me thinks that we have to start the education at the higher education level. It might be a little bit self-serving, but I do believe that, so that our graduates then can move into those industries and then really be advocates and leaders. And so I think in terms of what we need to do in terms of education, one, and Andrew, I think that you'll agree to this, is we really need to train people on systems thinking and tools to enable and measure circularity. Currently in the US, we really don't do that. There are some programs like our program that does courses on life cycle assessment, which really is a tool to think about systems thinking. But we need to really have that systems approach. And I will also say one of the, I think, biggest challenges of circular economy is that we are trying to do systems level changes often in fragmented industries. And so, it's that to me is like, and it's even really difficult when we're working in, the Northeast region. I think that there are great challenges with that in terms of fragmentation. But again, I think learning at the higher education level and then translating that as people matriculate through their careers, I think is critical.
Absolutely, all about the systems thinking. And then that's when you start to see that, just focusing in on recycling, you end up with quite political and economic barriers. So you have to start looking at different ways of organizing our business models, of our policies, and these sort of collaborations that we have seen already. Bunch more questions are coming in. I hope we'll be able to get to a good number of them before we get out of here. The next one I'd like to address is, what is the role, maybe Grant, I'd love to get your perspective on this. What is the role that perhaps the more agrarian county neighbors around Pittsburgh can play in moving to a circular economy? This is from Amanda Butterfield from Amplisource, which takes food residuals and turns them into high energy feed for livestock. So really good question. What can the surrounding agrarian area do?
Yeah, it's a super good question. I mean, I would say it's all part of this ecosystem, right? So I work for the city of Pittsburgh, which is, a fraction of the region. And so a lot of our services, both the services that we provide, as well as the services that we receive, come from and go throughout the region. So the borders that we think about, in many cases, are artificial constructs when we're thinking about a circular ecosystem. So I mentioned the landfills that we use as part of our waste management program. There are also places where they are collecting landfill gas that fuels trucks. So that's a good example of thinking in a circular approach. Likewise with, tools like anaerobic digestion and fuel recovery. Mike mentioned, transfer facilities. Many times these are locations that need to be outside of kind of the dense urban boundaries, and because they need room to move and to operate. So I think that's one component. I'd also think about our food systems. Food systems are very circular in that regard, with regards to whether it's using, composting material from farmers markets and taking that back to the farm and surrounding communities, or just kind of the food production cycle that we exist in here in Western Pennsylvania. How do we start to source more of our products and materials from the region ultimately starts to build both physical and economic resilience. So those are a couple ways in which, we start to think about how these things are connected.
Fantastic. We have time for just one more question, and I'd like to start with Mike on this question in terms of, who's really going to be driving the change to a circular economy. The question here is from Brian Jensen, asking, is it really just up to manufacturers, architects, and policy makers? Are there things individuals can be doing? So is there a call to action, or do you have a vision of who will be driving this?
Well, I think that we should never underestimate the incredible power that we have as consumers to demand what kinds of materials, what kinds of products, what kind of services, where those services come from. And the market ultimately will have to respond to those things. And when you see services and when you see products, support them, follow them, let other people know that these services are out there. I want to really quickly jump in with something that sort of to Grant's comment. Dawn Services, which is a social service organization in Newcastle, just did some experimentation with hempcrete, and they're getting farmers to convert their fields over to hemp. Let's look at locally sourced material. Let's demand those materials. Let's seek out those materials and support those initiatives.
Brilliant. I know we're out of time, but Grant and Melissa, I would love to get just a word from you on who's at the forefront of this. Is it policymakers and manufacturers who are going to do it, or should the households be up to something here?
I'm going to be easy. It's an all of the above. It's not one, it's all of the above.
Great.
100%. I agree with my dear friend Grant.
Excellent. Well, that's all the time we have for this discussion. There are a bunch more questions we didn't get to. I believe Covestro is collecting these questions, and we will attempt to answer them offline as we move on with the rest of the event today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, and thank you so much for the invitation to join today's event. My name is Lauren Phipps, and I'm the Director and Senior Analyst on the Circular Economy at GreenBiz Group. And I was asked to share a little bit about industry commitments to the circular economy and what I'm seeing in the market. For a little bit of context, GreenBiz Group is a media and events company that defines markets at the intersection of business, sustainability, and technology, and empowers communities to accelerate a just transition to a clean economy. The primary way that we do this is through events that build community within emerging sectors, as well as through stories and analysis that show the way forward. My job is to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. So I get to write about what I'm seeing in this space, and I get to convene the largest conference on the topic. It's taking place just next week, June 15th through 17th, and called Circularity, and I hope that you will join us. Across industries, roles, and sectors, business is driving the transition to a circular economy, particularly in the US. Without a robust policy framework like the US has, businesses have recognized that there's a huge opportunity, both financially as well as environmentally, to tackle climate change, to address resource constraints, to mitigate risk, and to really be brands of the future. It's across sectors. In fashion, apparel resale is expected to grow twice the rate of the overall apparel market in the US. And the growth is projected to 64 billion by 2024. This is not just your usual suspects. It's not just Patagonia and REI that have been doing this for a little while, but every single week I see new brands launching resale models. Recently, Levi's and H&M have both launched their own programs. And knowing that a product can be resold, knowing that there's a secondhand market for those products means that companies are going to design products better for life extension to be more durable, and it'll mitigate some of the fundamental problems within the fast fashion industry. In technology, in 2019 alone, the world generated 53.6 million tons of e-waste. This is the fastest growing waste stream, and only about 20% of e-waste is formally recycled each year. But companies like Apple have set goals to make all of their products without mining anything from the earth. And Cisco has committed to 100% product return, refurbishment, and modular design. They've committed to these comprehensive circular economy strategies, thinking from design to business models to everything it'll take across the value chain to ensure that their products are kept at their highest and best use. In home furnishings, IKEA is committed to being a fully circular business by 2030. That's everything from material sourcing down to recently launching models where they are buying back used furniture and selling it again. In plastics, 11 million metric tons are flowing into the ocean each year, impacting environments and communities. Though hundreds of brands, retailers, and government agencies have committed to making packaging recyclable, compostable, or reusable by 2025. And this is the biggest companies in the world: Coca-Cola, Unilever, Walmart. There are also new reusable packaging models at scale, like Loop, that's working with some of the biggest CPGs to offer your Haagen-Dazs in a beautiful reusable container, or your Tropicana orange juice in a beautiful bottle that's durable and efficient. The list goes on, and business is really driving action in a way that is so amazing. But for this to have real impact, they need to keep three things in mind. One is that goals only work when they're within systems. So a theoretically recyclable bottle is only actually circular and better for the world if it can be recycled and if there's infrastructure in place for that to happen. The same with a theoretically repairable smartphone. It needs to be repaired. Number two is that we need all businesses to be at the table. Currently, some estimates say that the goals around plastics and packaging will only impact 7% of the plastics flowing into the oceans, and that's definitely not enough. So we need more businesses to recognize the opportunity and to actually step up and join this conversation. And number three is that goals are really just the start. If companies don't achieve them, then all of this is for naught. And we need to have accountability mechanisms in place to ensure that what companies say they're going to do, they actually follow up on. It is such an exciting community to be a part of and such an exciting time to be working in the circular economy. So I hope wherever you sit in the value chain, you are joining me in being a part of the solution. And if you want to join in on the conversation, I hope you'll participate in Circularity 21 just next week, June 15th through 17th, to join other practitioners and thought leaders in making this reality possible. So thank you so much for the invitation to share some of my thoughts, and really appreciate being at this event.
Hello, everyone. I'm Richard Skorpinski, and I lead our advocacy and sustainability efforts here at Covestro in North America. And today I'm with one of my colleagues, Lynette Chung, who's zooming in all the way from our global headquarters in Germany. Lynette is our Chief Sustainability Officer for Covestro AG. So thanks for joining us today, Lynette. It's really a pleasure to see and talk with you. And just to get us started, I want to let the audience know that in May of 2020, Covestro announced its vision to become a circular economy leader. So Lynette, can you tell us about that vision and why Covestro believes it's critical, especially as a polymers and plastics company, to transition from the current linear economy to a more circular economy?
Thank you, Richard. It's great to be here today at this THINC30 event. So I appreciate you asking me to join you for this event. Our vision at Covestro is to become fully circular. This is a major component of our purpose to make the world a brighter place. When you look at the world around you today, we see climate change, growing environmental pressures, a growing world population, social inequalities. These are global, enormous challenges that we have around us today. As Covestro, we want to play our role and contribute to overcoming them. Plastics and polymers, the materials that we are working with in Covestro, are indispensable in modern life. Many advances in medical technology, sustainable construction, products ranging from renewable energy to electronics, all of this wouldn't be possible without plastics. So this unique versatility in plastics have driven great demand. We've seen 8 million tons being produced over the last 6-7 decades as such. And most of these, up to 40% of them, currently produced are used only once and then thrown away. So at Covestro, we know that the circular economy is essential to address these global challenges going forward. We see that as a way to address climate change, the issue of plastic waste, and we believe that it's vital that the plastics industry is part of making that happen. So for us, a linear economy is just no longer fit for the future. We need to go circular. So it's not only the society or Covestro as such. I think we really need to join forces in that regard and make circularity the global guiding principles and thereby addressing these global enormous challenges that I talked about. So for us, it is a business opportunity as well in that regard.
Well, that's great, Lynette. Thank you. And now that we have a better understanding about the why, let's talk a little bit about the how. So in anchoring circularity into all areas of our company, Covestro is focusing specifically on 4 key topics. So I'd like to take each of those areas individually and ask you to elaborate a bit. So the first one, let's start with our use of alternative raw materials. What materials are we using to replace fossil fuels, Lynette?
Well, first of all, it's important to state that in the future, Covestro will produce its products from alternative sources, and we will look for suppliers who can offer sustainable secondary raw materials, such as based on waste and upstream drop-in solutions. Carbon as a central plastic building block should come from alternative sources, such as end-of-life, waste, biomass, or even CO2. Our Cardion product, for example, is made with up to 20% of carbon dioxide and is being used in a variety of different applications, including flexible foams for mattresses and in a binder for synthetic sports flooring. Using CO2 as a feedstock reduces the dependency on fossil fuels and helps us to close the carbon loop, bringing back carbon dioxide into the value chain. Another great example that we have within Covestro is also using carbon from biomass. For example, in the automotive industry, our solutions for paints are formulated with up to 70% of the product carbon content derived from renewable raw materials. So Covestro's overall goal is to promote the use of alternative raw materials, making chemical production fit for the future. We believe using bio-based products, using CO2, and in particular using end-of-life materials are important in replacing the use of fossil fuels. With all of these together, we believe that we can help to make the chemical industry far more sustainable. So
you just mentioned end-of-life materials as an important raw material source for us. And that it happens that the second area of emphasis for Covestro is our approach to advanced recycling. Can you tell us some more about that?
Yes, absolutely. Recycling for us provides an outlet for end-of-life materials, and that helps to keep them in the value chain. I mentioned before that more than 40% of plastics currently produced are used only once and then thrown away. So we have a great opportunity here. However, due to the large variety of different plastics, we also need different recycling methods. Chemical recycling in particular is of interest to Covestro. This involves chemically breaking down plastics into their original molecules. which can then be used to produce new plastics. Our latest success in this area is a technology to chemically recycle soft polyurethane foams in mattresses. It is currently being tested in a pilot plant with promising results. This could provide a process to recycle millions of old mattresses and reproduce them into brand new mattresses. So that's already one of the examples that we do in terms of recycling. Another key important feature for us at Covestro is to also design plastics from the very beginning in a way that they can be optimally recycled. So we have developed a concept for car headlights that are made from just one type of plastics and consisting only of a few individual parts. This helps makes it easier to sort and thereby contributes to easier recycling, also ultimately closing that loop for that product application. So various recycling methods are available, and we are looking at all of these different opportunities within Covestro.
Okay, well, thanks for that. The third area, so in terms of energy, how are we using renewables in our own operations?
Yeah, also there it's important, and we see that renewables like solar and wind are becoming increasingly viable alternatives to fossil fuels. Our strategy here ranges from investing in alternative green energy solutions to improving our infrastructure to operate our manufacturing system with as little environmental impact as possible. For example, in 2019, we signed at that time the world's largest corporate power purchasing agreement for wind energy. In our manufacturing processes, we also look to improve efficiency, and there we're adopting the latest developments in technology, products, and artificial intelligence. Ultimately, we must power the circular economy using renewable energy in order to minimize our carbon footprint. To do so, we must work with policymakers, energy suppliers, and others to transition to a more renewable energy. And here we are very committed to working with collaborators to make that a success.
Okay, well, as you note, collaborations are important, and you described a couple of those. But why are cross-sector partnerships so important when it comes to circularity?
Yes, you're right there, Richard. They're really important because shifting to a circular economy is a large-scale project that can only be achieved by collaboration. Society, business, governments will have to cooperate across borders and continents. Different sectors have to collaborate, and within the sectors themselves, also individual players have a role to play. And we need to implement new practical solutions, and thereby it calls for collaborations. One important collaboration that we have in the US is the work Covestro is doing in collaboration with the Mattress Recycling Institute. It's a nonprofit focused on recycling end-of-life mattresses, as well as shaping system to streamline that process. We have 5 projects running with the Mattress Recycling Council aimed at various parts of the mattress life cycle, from design of a mattress all the way through disposal, collection, and recycling. This collaboration is a great example of building up strengths of different organizations to solve a problem. We are also a founding member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, a global network of companies, which was founded in 2019. The Alliance's focus here on promoting innovative technology and solutions, education, collaboration with government bodies, communities, and citizens, and projects to clean up plastic waste in the environment. And maybe let me just mention that the THINC30 event here today is itself a great showcase of how like-minded individuals and organizations can work together to drive the circular economy forward. So it's all about collaboration at the end of the day. Yeah.
Well, and that's what THINC30 is all about, is the UN SDGs. And so how does the transition to circularity support our work in achieving those UN Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah. For us, the circular economy has to include working on the majority of the UN SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as part of our business models. Our end markets fit very well into the SDGs. So when we focus on specific goals, an example of this is the goal 11 on sustainable cities and communities. Another one is the goal 12 on responsible consumption and production. Actually, we work to ensure that our businesses touches each and every one of the UN SDGs in a positive way. We've already talked about partnership and climate action. So as you can see, we have already got this framework of the SDGs to guide us, and the circular economy is pointing us in the right direction. The SDGs for us provides an excellent reference point, an overarching goal for driving the circular economy in a sustainable manner. So it's important to say that every facet of our company plays a powerful role when we look at how circularity helps us to deliver on the SDGs. So they are very well intertwined in the way we are delivering on circular economy.
Well, maybe taking a little bit of a step back, finally, Lynette. So within the industry as a whole, what role do you see Covestro playing here?
Yeah. One of the reasons I joined Covestro, and that was last year, is because I could see from an outside-in perspective that strong leadership is integral to support an industry-leading company, and in particular when it comes to sustainability. Covestro's vision and values, its ethos around people, planet, and profit, and its focus to become customer-centric, even more customer-centric than it is today, all while using the circular economy as a guiding principle to climate neutrality, gives us concrete foundations to remain a global industry leader and an industry influencer. So for me, that is key. And of course, our innovation pipeline and our R&D strategy keeps our focus sharp against segment competitors. But my eye in my role will always be on the sustainability topic and how it drives our company and our employees to work towards a sustainable future, a sustainable business, and ultimately making the world a brighter place as our company purpose is. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to join you, Richard. I hope this was as interesting for you and for the colleagues here as it has been on my side.
Thank you, Lynette. Glad you could join us.
Good morning. I'm assuming we start here. My name is Joel Tickna. I'm a professor at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, public health, and founder of the Green Chemistry and Commerce Council, a network of about 150 companies around the world across the value chain, moving sustainable chemistry across sectors in the value chain. So on today's panel, we're going to be looking at higher education's role in circular economy. Academia plays a critical role in advancing the circular economy through research, education, and community engagement. Academia plays an essential role in training the next generation of interdisciplinary thinkers necessary to advance change in engineering, science, and business, and the social sciences. Sustainability is increasingly a core element of university missions, but universities are often the slowest sector of society to change, having established silos, reward systems, and metrics that can get in the way of cross-disciplinary innovation and collaboration. And the training of many academics stands in the way of understanding the collaborative needs and real-world challenges in advancing circularity. In my own institution, I've worked for more than 20 years to build bridges between departments and secure academic leadership and resources to support collaboration around sustainable materials. And I'm lucky to have broad disciplinary training that allows me to see the connections beyond my own field and to the real world. For today's panel, we have three distinguished academic champions of circularity who will talk about their experiences, challenges, and strategies to advance circularity initiatives in their own institutions as a model for other institutions. Our three panelists are Dr. Melissa Billick, who we've already heard from, Deputy Director of the Mascaro Center for Sustainable Innovation at the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Rajesh Butch, Director of Circularity Practice at Arizona State University, and Dr. Karen Pearson, Chair of the Science and Math Department at FIT Sustainability at the Fashion Institute of Technology. Their full bios are on the THINC30 website. So I want to take a first time of going around the panel for you to each talk to us about your institution's commitment to circularity and sustainability, how it evolved, and what were the driving forces behind it, and what are the centerpiece elements of your institution's work in circularity. So why don't we start with you, Melissa?
So thank you so much, Joel, and I'm grateful to be back here again. You know, Pitt has really been a leader in sustainability, and the seeds of our Mascaro Center for Sustainable Innovation started over 15 years ago with the vision of our founder, Jack Mascaro. And since then, the Mascaro Center has grown from an initiative to a university center through the university support, along with philanthropic support from our founder, Jack Mascaro, John Swanson, the Heinz Endowments, and many, many others. Pitt is committed to the ambitious goal of carbon neutrality by 2037. Some of you might be like, why? And this honestly was me too. What's 2037? That's actually our 250th anniversary. So there's some really nice symbolism with that as well. So my research group and I, with the support of Pitt's Office of Sustainability, with my dear friend, Dr. Aurora Sherrard, we've been working on the campus-wide greenhouse gas inventory since 2008, allowing us to then track and account for the annual decreases in greenhouse gas emissions. Over the past 5 years, our Mascaro Center has truly been committed to focusing our efforts on circular economy research and education. And we've been trying to do that and have been doing that through creating novel circular economy designs while ensuring that our circular economy efforts are truly environmentally benign. What we don't want to do is to come up with a circular economy solution that then really contributes then to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And we at the Mascaro Center have supported circular economy research through our really popular Sea Grant program. In addition, our university is working on circularity through innovative construction contracts, along with our business as usual practices. And so those are just some of the things that we've been working on at the University of Pittsburgh.
Thank you, Melissa. Karen, do you want to go?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here with you and have the opportunity to talk about what we're doing at FIT in respect to both sustainability and circularity. At FIT, I need to give you a little bit of kind of background about the institution itself. And FIT stands for the Fashion Institute of Technology, and we're part of the State University system of New York. And in that space, we are really working in many cases of preparing workforce for the next generation. Our students have self-defined that they are interested in going into the creative fields and into the fashion-related industries, both in the design space, but also in many cases in the business and production end of that. So that gives us a lot of leeway in terms of our programming. So at FIT, I actually chair the Department of Science and Math, which has a large STEAM focus in our curricular offerings and our programming, and that allows us to develop curriculum in sustainability. It allows us to do things like we teach life cycle analysis. We keep building new and scaling new and different programs. We have a very successful minor in sustainability and ethics that allows our students to take courses across college. We have some other new minors that focus on circularity and more specifically the science of sustainability that are coming out. But in addition to that, when I put my other hat on, I also chair the sustainability effort for the college. And that's a full college initiative that's is run out of the president's office, and it includes the facilities teams. It looks at our success with our engineering and physical plant team. We've actually done very well in terms of the mayor's carbon challenge. I can't say that ever quite correctly. It's always such a tongue twister. But what it's really done is FIT is such a unique institution in and of itself. It sits in Midtown Manhattan. It is in the center of the city. So our campus footprint is small, but we have green roofs, we have a natural dye garden, we have a number of very unique facilities and a large commitment by the college that all of our renovations and upgrading of our physical systems are done to standards that help us meet those targets of being carbon neutral and reducing our carbon footprint. And one of the really kind of important things is what FIT's real mission is. And this comes from our mission statement, which is that FIT fosters creativity, career focus, global perspective, and educates students to embrace inclusiveness, sustainability, and a sense of community. So coupled within that, we've used that to create multifaceted, both formal and informal learning opportunities that are for the whole community. And that's where my work has really focused. We spend a lot of time at FIT talking about Sustainable Development Goal number 12, but it's not the only one we speak of. We are equally unique in providing opportunities for women and girls, and that simply comes from the fact that our student body is actually 85% female. So I could go on and on, but I think FIT has really made this commitment to looking at our programming, thinking about curricular opportunities and learning for the community, and then learning for both our faculty and our staff as well. And doing that not just for our FIT community, but also our FIT partners. So that means our industry partners, and talking to them and working with them as we think about how we train and develop and actually work towards a more sustainable future, not just at FIT, but more globally in the fashion-related industries.
Great, thank you, Karen. Raj?
Joel, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, at ASU, our mission towards sustainability started about 15 years ago when ASU started the first School of Sustainability and Institute of Sustainability. And as far as initiatives go, ASU, obviously similar to what Karen and Melissa said, integrated sustainability within campus operations and set goals for carbon neutrality and energy, water, and even zero waste goals. So that's evolving on the campus. We started an initiative about 9 years ago, the Walton Sustainability Solutions Service, which is what I'm part of. It's a bridging organization, basically. We try to bridge sustainability solutions to applied sustainability ideas and knowledge from the university to applied solutions outside to organizations locally, regionally, and even globally. So we created that initiative and are engaging outside of the university that way. And then on the education side, because of our sustainability approach to everything, we push this concept of this idea of the ethical circular economy. So we're teaching circular economy, but adding ethics to the front of it, making sure that circular economy has as a priority social impact and not as an afterthought. So, but we have also very similar, I won't repeat a lot of things that Karen and Melissa said, but we're doing similar stuff on campus and engaging entities outside of the university.
All of you mentioned this idea of partnerships outside of the university, which sometimes are not typical. A lot of academics live in their ivory towers. What have you learned from that engagement outside of the university and lessons for building those relationships more effectively with business stakeholders or community stakeholders and others so that you can actually learn from them, but connect and serve better? Do you want to start, Melissa?
Sure. And I think the previous session that we had on thinking about the city as a circular economy hub really kind of set the foundation for this question, Joel. You know, I really think that we need to have continued dialogue and also to think about how we are not only continuing that dialogue, but really thinking about how we sustain that knowledge over time. So for example, we just completed a really great eco-village capstone project at the University of Pittsburgh with the city and Construction Junction. And now the idea is how do we take that knowledge and leverage it? And so it's not just the initial kind of conversations and collaborations, but it's the sustained engagement. I would say the other thing that I think about is that whenever we think about moving from, the ivory tower to then potentially industries, I do think, and as Raj mentioned and Karen mentioned, oftentimes we are really contributing or have the potential to be solutions to circular economy. So for example, in the Pittsburgh region, the University of Pittsburgh is one of the largest employers. And so we are huge consumers of products. So we really need to also lead by example and set this in different contracts and how we are then really engaging with the community and industry.
Great. Karen, you want to add to that of how you've connected with the fashion sector and other sectors to bring that perspective into the work you're doing, or even community advocates and others?
Absolutely. I think at FIT, I think it's really important to kind of note that the connection to industry is something that is part of our fabric. The university has had that partnership with industry from the very beginning. So we come at this from a slightly different component in that we don't need, our industries actually see us as our partner. And more they're looking to partner with us to talk about innovative solutions and also how we're training the workforce. So people always ask, is it hard to get industry professionals to come into the classroom or to do programming on campus? And the simple answer is, for us, it's not, but it's because we've been working with them. Almost all FIT students do at least one internship during their time at FIT. And in many cases, they'll actually do two. And I think that component right there has been very helpful for us. But we've done a lot of outreach to our city partners to having, ensuring that we are doing things that connect with the overarching goals of New York and reducing the carbon footprint in the city. And in many cases, we've had an amazing team in the physical plant sector who have worked with the city to find opportunities so we could get seed grants and funding to be trial spots for projects that are really more about the internal structure and the operation. So things like the chiller plant, the green roofs. And beyond that, we've done seed projects for students and faculty and staff as well. And many of those partner with industry. And we have a strong focus of bringing them back, students out into industry to see what they're doing, and industry back to campus. Our annual Sustainable Business and Development Conference is a great example of that, because the industry really looks to come and talk and share what they're doing, but also hear what our students are doing and help us think about what that programming and curriculum should look like.
Right. And Raj, you sort of made the backward switch from industry into academia. What have you learned from that switch into academia about how higher education works and some of the challenges?
Well, as Karen and Melissa will know, higher education is a whole different animal, of course, to private sector. And to your whole point that the entire institutional system has this Ivory Coast mentality. At ASU, what I came into was into an environment where our president started changing the culture at ASU about 15 years ago around the idea that he came up with the New American University, where the university needs to be embedded in the community that it's engaging in. The university needs to be an inclusive system and not an exclusive system. And it needs to do use-inspired research. So around that mentality, the entire culture at ASU was changed to be transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. Departments were merged. Schools were renamed. We don't have civil engineering and environmental engineering, and we have those departments, but the school is called the School of Sustainable Engineering and the Built Environment. So that you had all of these specialists in these different disciplines sitting in the same buildings. Their offices were next to each other. It forced them to be transdisciplinary and submit for grants in that way. So that was a shift that was made. how have we witnessed that at ASU? How do we bring that across to the other departments and teach it? There was an inventory done a few years ago of the number of classes that ASU teaches that has sustainability in the syllabus. And in one fall semester, they counted over 70,000 classes that had sustainability in the syllabus. So basically, President Crow made it part of the culture, part of the academic system to say we are going to teach sustainability to every discipline across the university. All incoming freshmen have to learn about sustainability. That's kind of the way it's been spread throughout ASU for the last more than a decade.
Yeah, I would say as someone who's been in academia for 20 plus years, ASU is what we all aspire to. One of the, if not the largest public university in the country that's showing it can be done, and it can bring in even marginalized communities, and especially marginalized communities, into that discussion about sustainability. Let's move on to challenges a little bit. What are some of the biggest challenges you've faced in advancing your programs, and how have you addressed them? And were they internal or external? And are there misjudgments or mistakes you had to learn from along the way? Go ahead, Melissa.
So first, I'd like to echo what Raj and Jules said. I've been really inspired by the vision set forth by Michael Crow at ASU. And to your question, Joel, in terms of challenges, I think in many ways there are internal challenges. And so the problem also, as you talked about the ivory tower, is that, many of our universities are really siloed, whether it's through the departments, as Raj has mentioned, or schools or colleges. And it still is a challenge today to do interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research. And, part of that, and Joe, you'll appreciate this, as I've also learned from my colleague, Dr. Eric Beckman, is that we are not incentivized to necessarily do transdisciplinary research. And it is hard. It takes a lot of time. It is not easy to do. But to me, as a faculty member and as on the leadership team of a research center, I feel like we really need to think about the true impact and the potential of that impact that we have, whether it's on research, education, or community engagement. We really have the potential to have a positive impact to society. And that's something that drives me every day.
Yeah, that's great. I would second your point. I mean, reward structures are challenging, right? I'm measured on how much money I pull in and how many peer-reviewed papers I publish a year, which is not consistent with having a community impact always. I have a little story here about the silos that I'll just bring in quickly. I was working closely with the head of chemical engineering at UMass Amherst, and came out of 30 years in industry, really wanted to build the university as a leader in bio-based chemicals. And it turns out that his office was right down the hall from the group of environmental health scientists who I had worked with for 20 years, who had extensive experience in product toxicology, et cetera, and they had never talked, even though they were on the same hall. And it took me connecting those dots of people who never would have talked together, but they should have, because someone from industry should have thought about, oh, I need toxicologists to actually design this stuff too. So anyways, Karen, what have been your challenges, and how have you addressed them?
Well, I think we're always all going to have so many challenges. I love, hearing the stories out of ASU. They have, in many cases, provided such great models for how we can approach this kind of the biggest challenge, which I actually think is, how do we be a little bit disruptive, but still make sure that we're providing the value and the targets that our graduating students need to have in higher education, those skills that they need to have. And I think, disruptive models are scary. And I think that probably is our biggest challenge, which is, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary courses and curriculum. They all speak to the principles of sustainability and the three major pillars. And so they're always a beautiful place for us to use as a model and a starting point. But that said, our historic academic culture didn't always lead to that. You studied chemistry in the chemistry building, and you didn't meet with the people who were in engineering or even in biology, which was a connected building in some cases. And in many cases, I think our biggest challenge is actually finding these missed opportunities in these places where we can be disruptive to the old system and way of doing work and collaborating, and making it easier for us not just to collaborate in our own institutions, but collaborate across much broader boundaries and across institutions, and have that be easier for students to benefit from that. One of the things I've actually worked hard on is having internal projects that are small examples that show students getting research opportunities to do small projects where we specifically pluck both faculty advisors from diverse backgrounds and also then pluck students who come with those faculty members to work on a specific project. So this semester we worked on, SUNY had an initiative for PPE, and we said we wanted to do more sustainable and inclusive PPE as our design. And so we took myself, a material scientist by trade, a production management faculty member, a design faculty, and a textile development faculty, and everybody brought a student or two to work on the project. And the student said it was the most transformative experience that they had. But that really took us all being like, we are going to love this project. We are going to do it. We are going to figure out how to collaborate. And it wasn't easy. I mean, Melissa mentioned it, Raj mentioned it. There's a lot of potential energy that's required. But the student said it was transformative. And I'm hearing from our industry partners that they want that transformative component, and they want to be able to collaborate with us in that same way as well. And you're starting to see small pockets in our industries doing that. And so I think it's about being disruptive enough and being open to being part of that change.
Yeah, I really like
afraid that your sandbox is changing.
Yeah, I really like that disruptive, transformative idea that isn't necessarily how academia thinks, right? And partly is because it's the way we get funding is for not very transformative, not very big things, right? Little tweaks around the edges often.
Well, and this is the last 2 years have been 2 years where everybody had to think differently about doing everything we have done. But also we hear a lot, for people who kind of lust after how it used to be. So I think that balancing act is a really difficult spot, but I'd love to hear.
Yeah, no, that's great. Raj, why don't you weigh in? And also, what kind of role do you see ASU playing in circular economy innovation, and what kinds of research are you doing to support innovation in circular economy?
Sure. So I'll kind of start by seconding and thirding what Karen and Melissa said about the internal challenges. Of course, trying to get different departments and faculty to work together. In my initiative, we do exactly what Karen is suggesting, where we try to build multidisciplinary teams. So take a holistic view at a problem and bring in the different faculty and have them bring the students. So we have a very similar model, Karen, to do that. In terms of innovation and entrepreneurship, that's another aspect that President Crow has integrated here at ASU, saying that the future of development is in sustainability and it's in innovation and entrepreneurship. So again, that's integrated across the system, the academic system here at ASU. We build transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary student teams. So we have more and more project-oriented education on the academic side. So we have different labs and different courses where student teams are created from business, from policy, from engineering, from social sciences, and they try and tackle a problem from all different perspectives. So that's where I think ASU has evolved in the way we deliver some of those educational opportunities. In terms of research, really our signature area of operation, if you will, or working and developing, is partnering with the city of Phoenix. Over the last 8 years, we've actually made an effort to try and engage outside and work with the city to create a regional circular economy. And as I said earlier, it's trying to focus on making it inclusive and ethical from the beginning, but also how can you integrate innovation and entrepreneurship to create those jobs? how can you focus on the economy part of circular economy? You can make material streams circular, but you need to actively think about how to make sure it's inclusive and driving economic impact locally. So really, that's our signature work that we've done with the City of Phoenix around innovation, entrepreneurship. We've developed an incubator and an accelerator program. That's something ASU is really strong at also. So those are some of the areas.
Great. Melissa, what about, I mean, you've talked a little bit about the work with Pittsburgh. Do you see that regional connection as really, really key? And then also, you know, is there specific research your group is doing to really advance, you know, circular economy? You've talked about Pittsburgh, but at the industrial level and across sectors?
Yeah, so I'm clearly committed to the regional connection. I mean, I think that one of the key principles of circular economy is really thinking about how we can create and reuse existing products, and having that within the regional context, I think, is really important. In terms of research, one of the things that we're doing is I'm the principal investigator on a large project, which is a growing convergence research project funded by the National Science Foundation. And we're working with a team of engineers, anthropologists, and economists. And similar to what Raj has mentioned, a key part of what we're doing is really on co-creation of knowledge and thinking about how we put people and the well-being of people at the center of a circular economy. To date, circular economy has really been product driven. But what we do know is that if we don't include people and environmental justice and social justice, then we really are missing a key part of circular economy.
Great. No, that's really helpful. Karen, any last thoughts? We're sort of hitting our time now, but from your perspective, specific, you talked about the work on respirators, but other innovations you see sort of in research coming on?
Well, yeah, I think I see innovation across the supply chain. I see that we have great opportunities at all facets within the supply chain to partner with our industries to look at the materials that we use, but also how we're using them, how we manufacture them, and making it much more possible to do small runs with newer textiles that maybe have a smaller carbon footprint or do more production locally. But this takes partnership across all of the major players in the supply chain from the beginning. So not at the end, not designing something and then coming and hoping that they work with it, but talking and working material science, for example, with the production team. From the chat I pulled off and somebody asked what some of the alternatives that we might see are working on. And I think there's a number of opportunities in the biomimicry-based textile fibers area, work with algae, things that are highly renewable. But there's also a lot of really great work that's coming out where people are recycling basically food waste into fibrous components and using that as a textile base. And I think that there's much more work and collaboration in that space. So I hope that we can keep this kind of collaborative format moving, that we're talking about and involving people and institutions and creating opportunities across the board.
Great. I just want to thank this amazing group of academic leaders and their institutions for showing us what is possible, and leadership, community engagement, grassroots building and connecting, all key components here of academia serving the role it should be, which is creating the next generation of leaders and then supporting the transformation to a circular economy. So thank you all for all that you're doing and all that you're contributing to the next generation of leadership.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks so much.
Hello, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Miranda Wang, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Novaloop. We're an advanced recycling technology startup based in California, and we actually first came in contact with Covestro by being part of the UN Young Champions of the Earth program, which Covestro had sponsored. So I've been passionate about reducing plastic waste and the circular economy since I was very young. My current co-founder, Jeannie, and I are high school best friends, and we discovered the problem plastic waste when we were in our hometown, Vancouver, Canada, after coming across a huge amount of plastic waste after visiting a waste transfer station. And that made us realize that, plastics have a really important part in our society. And despite the plastic bag bans, despite, introducing compostables, there's still going to be a huge amount of plastics used in our society. And we think it's really important to be able to, looking into innovation, to be able to actually circularize that plastic and feed it back into the economy. And if for certain polymers like polyethylenes, which are the starting material that we use, because there's a lack of a circular, unlike PETs, because there's a lack of a circular solution for them, we have been focusing on a technology to break down polyethylenes and turn the chemical building blocks, which are dicarboxylic acids, into polyols and into polyurethanes. And I know polyurethane is very close to heart here, but we've been focusing on a first product, which is a thermoplastic polyurethane made from low-density polyethylene waste that we source from waste management facilities left over from a mechanical recycling process. We've been working on scaling up this technology with a third-party toller and getting samples out to consumer brands to develop products that everybody would wear and use every day. So in this next step, we're currently working on identifying scale-up partners to take this even further into the commercial scale. I think it's really important when we talk about the circular economy here to make some compelling arguments around there's the reality of all of this plastic is constantly being produced and is needed by society. Some things like disposables, is quite controversial, but there's a lot of plastics, like agricultural plastics, for example, that are essential to society. And there has to be a way for us to get those kinds of waste commodities back into the economy. And I think durables is a great place to go. So thank you for having me here today, and happy to connect and touch base about any of this later on. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Alita Richards, Adhesives and Specialties here at Covestro in the U.S. I'm delighted to be here today to lead this panel discussion about the areas that can have the biggest mitigation impacts by adopting circular principles. Areas like eliminating food waste, capturing carbon, and recycling and reusing building materials. We're so lucky to have some leading authorities here with us today. So please welcome Noah Deitch, a co-founder and president of Carbon 180, an organization on a mission to rethink carbon. Stacy Smedley, who leads up sustainability for Skanska USA, whose parent company is one of the world's largest construction and development companies. Stacy is also executive director of the NGO Building Transparency. And we'll find out more about all of these organizations a little later. And we also have Katie Franklin here, who is the operations director at ReFed, an organization focused on reducing food and waste. So let's first chat about carbon, Noah. Carbon 180's mission is to build a prosperous, carbon conscious economy that removes more carbon from the atmosphere than we emit. Please share with us, a little bit about the carbon capture industry, its growth, and your new congressional blueprint report, Zero, then Negative.
Let me unmute here, but let me say first and foremost, thank you so much for hosting. This is a really exciting event. I'm really glad to be a part of it. And what would an event be if I couldn't figure out how to get off mute on Zoom 15 months into this thing, right? But I think what I'm really excited about is when I was introduced to climate change and carbon pollution, the entire frame of reference was, how do we stop carbon going into the atmosphere? And that's where the conversation ended. Of course, we have to do that. We have to figure out renewable energy and ways to electrify much of the industry that uses fossil fuels today. But actually, that's only half of the equation. One of the things that I learned during my time at UC Berkeley, talking to the leading climate scientists, is that we also have to take carbon out of the atmosphere, and we have to do so at a massive scale if we want to meet our climate goals. We basically have to take the economy's relationship with carbon today, which is we pull tens of billions of tons of fossil fuels out of the ground and put them into the atmosphere. And we have to do the opposite. We have to take that carbon that's already in the atmosphere from centuries of industrial activity, pull it back out, and put it back underground. And that's a huge transformation of the economy that I think we're only scratching the surface of today in terms of what's required. And where we get excited as opposed to just overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge is the solution set, which is really broad. So at Carbon 180, we look at everything from how do you plant trees to farm in ways that sequester carbon. Again, 100 million years of photosynthesis has figured out how to capture carbon from the air pretty efficiently. Well, maybe not efficiently, but definitely zero cost, right? And so how do we harness that system to do so much of the work that we need to take carbon out of the atmosphere? But the real exciting thing is all the stuff that we build today with fossil fuels, not just the energy that we use in the fossil fuels that we burn, but the plastics that are at the core of our consumer economy. All of that can be made with carbon from the air. We don't have to use fossil for that. And that's a complete paradigm shift in our mind about how we think about solving climate change. It's not just this ephemeral, invisible thing, but we can say, how do I make sure that all of the products that we use in some way contribute to carbon sequestration? And we think broadly, it's not just the plastics, but how did the food that we eat contribute to carbon sequestration when it was grown? How does the building that we live and work and play in, how does that building use sustainably harvested timber or concrete or carbon fibers that sequester carbon? Like, there's just so many opportunities that emerge when we think about, okay, how do we actually take carbon out of the atmosphere? That in my mind, it's really hope inspiring.
Okay.
But you mentioned, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to tie it back to the policy blueprint too, which I think is really underappreciated and how important it is to catalyze this economy. I think if you look at carbon capture and taking carbon out of the atmosphere, turning it into stuff, or honestly just burying it, which we need to do as well, it looks a little bit like renewable energy did 10, 20 years ago. And I remember conversations where you talk to business leaders and they said, yeah, solar, wind, it all sounds nice, but look, the stuff is too expensive. It's never going to scale to the cost that matters. And those conversations, quite frankly, just sound ridiculous today, looking at how quickly the field has emerged and moved forward. And I think it's really important to say, okay, how did that happen? And it happened with policy, that we provided incentives for research and development. We provided incentives to get technology that was too expensive into a market that had an unfair advantage. It had hundreds of years of fossil energy subsidies and development and infrastructure that was built. And we needed that policy push to get this happening. And that's exactly what I see today. It's that there is all of this promise. If we can get that policy push, this new carbon economy is possible. But I think part of the reason why it's so new and so novel is that there are huge barriers to building from carbon in the air as opposed to carbon underground, because it's not mature and it's not essentially competing on a level playing field today. And that, in my mind, is the role that policy can play in all of this.
So I take it from what you said that you see implementing effective policy is one of those ways to eliminate some of those barriers.
Yeah, I think it's really essential. And it's not the only tool, that I think corporate leaders and investors need to find ways to make money doing this now, because you can't. And I think that that's the really exciting thing. The problem is, how do we go from these niche use cases today that do make money into something that's scalable on the order that matters for climate? That's where the inflection of policy really matters. And it's a positively reinforcing cycle that policymakers aren't going to do stuff that industry and consumers aren't excited about. But likewise, people aren't going to pay double, triple the cost for something just because it impacts climate. I know we wish that people would, but at the end of the day, shareholders and consumers aren't as willing to take that cost premium. And we know that so many of these industries are just very, very price sensitive. And so they're not going to move by themselves towards that more sustainable alternative. We need to structure the market to get them there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Noah. And I think that then that's a great transition to Stacy because Skanska has been leading in green building for more than 20 years, right? So what drives its commitment to mitigating environmental impacts?
I think we have been looking at this for a long time at Skanska through the lens of what we build and making sure that it's we have a value called care for life, that we're looking at how what we build impacts both the people but also the environment around our projects. So I think that's just a core value. This really hit the head, I think, 5 years ago or so when that leadership at Skanska, our publicly traded company, decided to put out zero carbon commitments for our global footprint. And that's zero carbon, including our supply chain. Because when we started to dig into the data, we found that those materials that we were building out of were the main source of our emissions impacts. So I think it started with just an overarching value that we needed to be understanding of what we were building from an environmental impact perspective. But now it's actually a commitment for us to get to zero and really understand how to do that for things like concrete and steel.
No, I guess Skanska then is an example of one organization that is fully embracing what it needs to do from an environmental and a circular perspective. And Stacy, you have two hats. So tell us also about your organization building transparency.
Sure. I guess I have one literal hat and two figurative ones that I wear because at Building Transparency and Skanska, the hat that I'm wearing on my head is actually what I'm doing every day. But Building Transparency is a nonprofit organization that stood up about a year ago. I'm the executive director, supported by Skanska to do that work. And its sole purpose is to provide the free tools and data necessary to mitigate construction's impact on climate change. So that, again, is very heavily focused on the carbon emissions of the materials that we use in the construction sector. We have a tool called EC3 that was co-conceived of by myself at Skanska to try to understand how we could look at the impacts of things like concrete and steel and actually procure based on carbon, just like we do on cost. The tool is a free tool that's out in the marketplace with about 14,000 users to date. And its sole purpose is to create that competition in the business case to invest in low carbon and zero carbon materials.
Okay, thank you. So I would say, what are some of the obstacles that you also see within that space?
So I think that Noah's point about cost is a good one. So when it comes to construction and how we build, just like any other kind of industries or sectors, it comes down to the bottom line of how much it costs to build that building for that owner. What we're seeing, though, which I think is the hopeful side, is that a lot of the large owners, our board at Building Transparency consists of Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Salesforce. A lot of those large owners are making these same zero carbon commitments that Skanska has. Mm-hmm. And part of that is actually understanding their supply chain and getting that carbon out of their supply chain. So it becomes more than just a cost conversation if they're balancing the cost of a product with their carbon contents. So I think there's a positive there where it's becoming just part of the decision-making matrix, which is exciting. And then I think the other point I'd like to make, just to give a little bit more hope, I think is, part of the work that we do is really working with the suppliers and the makers of these materials the cement producers, the concrete plants, to help them understand this is something that we want in terms of them getting the carbon emissions out of their products, but also to understand what they're doing. And I had a conversation with a global concrete cement supplier about a month ago, and it's more than just a response to market. They've got an internal carbon fee tied to their plant operations. So the bonuses for their plant operators are tied to the carbon reductions they have to meet. So that means that it's more than just, how much can we charge for this carbon sequestering concrete? It's that it's part of their actual business case internally of how they pay their employees profit share. And they're talking about things like, in 20 years when we figured out these technologies, we will do it in time. It will just be how we actually upgrade our plants. It's not going to be an additional cost. We're just going to go to carbon sequestration at the kiln for the cement. And that's going to be the upgrade that we're making. It's not going to be an investment that's on top. So when I ask questions around cost, they say, give us a little time. This is just going to become how we do business, and it's not going to be a premium of 50% like you may anticipate. So that's where I get my hope, is actually those direct conversations with the suppliers and seeing how really engaged and invested they are.
Cool. No, that's hopeful. It always has an impact when performance is directly tied to a given KPI, right? And that's nice. All that is linked together. So now if we can transition to Katie. Here in the US, about 35% of all the food goes unsold or uneaten or ends up in trash. In your report, The Roadmap to 2030, Reducing Food Waste by 50%, you say that food waste is a solvable problem. So what is the plan, and how is ReFed leading the way?
Well, thank you so much for having me today. And, as you mentioned, we focus entirely on food waste reduction with our focus team here in the United States. And in our recent roadmap, we laid out over 40 different solutions bucketed within 7 key action areas that stakeholders from across the food system need to take action on to meet our common goal. It's actually aligned with one of the SDGs, 12.3, a sub-indicator of SDG 12. To cut food waste in half by 2030. And so, the climate impacts really vary depending on what solution type you're looking at, based on, where they might be intervening in terms of point of the supply chain, kind of where they're impacting, resource investment in that food production, how much has traveled and things like that. But we provide this roadmap to help folks get a really data-driven look at what can be done here. I'm a little garbled. Can you guys hear me okay?
Kind of.
I can try to talk more slowly. Thank you. And so we give folks a really data-driven path so that when we're talking with industry, when we're talking with investors like Noah and like Stacey were mentioning, that they're able to make those business cases. It's wonderful if policymakers, if industry, if everyone's willing to do this simply because it's the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, the folks who need to take the most action in most places are food businesses. Food is kind of their currency. They're not going to take these actions just because it is the right thing, but there needs to be a business case. And the great thing is that there is a business case. Wasting food is, wasting against their bottom line in most instances. So there really isn't an incentive for them to be wasting food. They would much rather have that, be produced, be sold, go and feed someone in a healthy and exciting manner. And so we're providing folks with, that information that they need to, inform and drive decisions within their operations, as well as within their supply chains. I really like, quite a few themes I've heard in this panel and earlier today in terms of kind of working throughout the supply chain, this multi-stakeholder aspect of it, and also kind of the data-driven component. You were mentioning, performance KPIs. We've actually seen some major food companies, Sodexo is a great example, where they've even tied financing mechanisms to food waste KPIs. And that type of performance tie-in is really incredible because it's not only, creating that direct connection, but it's also showing how much they recognize the importance of these topics and really elevates it to that level for others to see how critical it is. But it all comes back to, for us, that it's a systems issue. Food waste and reducing food waste is ultimately making our food system more efficient. it's kind of silly to think that we have such a critical system that we all rely on that operates at 35% in efficiency. And historically, we've all just been like, oh, that's cool. No worries. We'll just keep going on like that. It's absolutely insane. And so there's so many solutions out there. Some of them are kind of workforce solutions or just new strategies like changing portion sizes. Cookies have grown drastically since the 1970s. There's some really interesting kind of vignettes of this, even The Joy of Cooking, Julia Child's famous cookbook. The portion sizes have gone up while the number of people they serve has gone down. So it's kind of interesting little trends that you see kind of over the years where something like portion sizes actually has a significant impact on food waste. And then there's other solutions that can be, really technical, really innovative, and for a lot of people, maybe more fun and exciting, whether that's, AI-enabled waste tracking solutions, in your store where consumers and retailers both in real time are getting live data about, how fresh a product is. And ultimately, I think what we're excited about is moving over the next decade towards a system where it's just harder for us as consumers to waste food. We're bringing in more solutions like Appeal that have a coating barrier that's derived from other food waste products, actually, that makes your avocados and your other food products last longer. We don't notice that as consumers, and it's just like, cool, my avocados last longer. We start to go to buffets and we don't have trays anymore, so it's a little harder for us to take 8 slices of whatever we're interested in, and maybe we have to get up once or twice to go get that extra round of food, but it's still there for us if we want it. And so it's these little changes that I think we'll start to see over the next, hopefully a few years, but definitely into this coming decade as we work towards that national goal.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you. It's something I always laugh. I can remember going to the store and getting a candy bar back in the day when I was a kid, and the candy bar sizes today. So I can absolutely appreciate what you said as far as portion sizes are much different than they were in the past, and being more mindful about taking what we need, right, and not wasting. So I'll be sure that I add that to the things that I think about. I appreciate and thank you for all of your perspectives and your stories. I'm always impressed as to how folks are impacting and making change in society, in the economy, and particularly in our environment. I think one thing that probably spans across all three for you and all of your organizations is this need to collaborate. I don't think we can be successful unless we pull in a wide variety of people. And I'm sure that folks that are listening to this panel would appreciate some insights from the three of you as to kind of what do you do? You're making an impact out there. How are you using collaboration to be able to continue that impact? I think that would be something I know I would be interested in hearing.
I'll just jump in because this is what it's all about for us. I mean, I think the example of what we're doing with EC3 as a free open access tool started with an idea that came from Skanska, that then Microsoft jumped on board with, then got incubated at a university with over 50 industry partners giving input and funding, and now as a free tool with over 14,000 users. And we're seeing emission reductions across all of those users of course are 30% now that they have access to this tool. Mm-hmm. So I think the trend towards an ecosystem of free data and accessible solutions across, it's not just for building industry, but across all of the things that we're talking about, so that whether you're a professional or a consumer, you have access to the information that you need to make smart decisions, and the business case is there for the suppliers and manufacturers of building materials or food items. Mm-hmm. The more that's an aligned collective set of data and aligned asks across those sectors from the people that are buying those products, I think that's a trend that we're seeing and something that I'm really excited about. It was a use case if we open source this thing, but people jump on board, and could it become kind of a collective use instead of 5 million different solutions that we all do in our own little silos, and it's proved that. we don't have the time to do it all on our own. So I think there's an urgency that's developing now that we're seeing, which even, being in the climate space for over 20 years now, in the past 5, I think has been more of a tipping point for me. So I don't know if that's a really concise answer, but I think that there's the trends there when it comes to what we're seeing around people aligning and working together versus competing.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you very much for that specific, or for giving us even more detail around that, your original example. No, I saw you shaking your head up and down. I take it that you also buy into, I guess it's kind of like a mom and apple pie. No one's going to say, no, you shouldn't collaborate, right? Can you give us some insights into how your organization is also collaborating out there?
Yeah, of course. And I'll add 2 dimensions to this, which there has been collaboration historically on climate policy between big companies, big environmental groups. And what I see missing historically, and one thing that we're really committed to at Carbon 180, is expanding that conversation. So how do we work with local community groups, environmental justice groups who are on the ground feeling the impact of pollution every day, but also need to be brought into the conversation to figure out how do we change our economic system to sequester carbon instead of emit it, so that projects actually help people. And same thing on the innovation side, is that innovators and entrepreneurs are often really focused on just how do I make a product and sell it to a customer. They don't have time to think about, okay, what policy incentives are actually available to me, or what do I need the policy landscape to look like in 3 years so that my company can really thrive. And so we're spending a lot of time trying to connect with folks who have not been central to the climate policy conversation and bring them to the table and really empower them to lead. And I think we find a ton of enthusiasm. And I saw the question about how do we build political will when you look at DC and it looks like a hot mess, even today. Like, the partisanship is nasty and it's inefficient and it's bad. But what I think we can do is, if we make benefits real and tangible to lots of different stakeholder groups across America, that's what cuts through the politics. Is, at the end of the day, nobody's going to oppose cleaning up carbon pollution if it can create good jobs, if it can make our rural and industrial economies stronger, create more economic and investment opportunities. Like, these are things that people see through the partisanship in many cases. And we've seen that in DC, where we've had senators from Wyoming collaborate with senators from Rhode Island, and hearing them talk, you can't tell which one's from the fossil state and which one's the climate hawk, right? So I think that's the key for us, is how do we really broaden who wins in this case and make sure that the voices that have been missing are at the table.
Okay, no, it's a great point. I think you're absolutely right. Once you define the benefit, we all enjoy the benefit, regardless of which side of the of the continuum we are on. And Katie, I'm sure collaboration also plays a role in your space as well.
Yeah, so similar to Stacey, we do a lot of collaboration around data. So in February, we launched the Insights Engine, which was our and the sector's kind of biggest push to just get better data out there around food waste. The food system just in general is not great on data. And so it was an effort where we worked with, over 50 sources of data, over 80 different experts from industry, academia, practitioners, vetting methodologies, providing feedback. And it not only, made the product better, obviously, but it made everyone feel like they were a part of the solution. And now they all see themselves in that work. It's not just refeds, it's the food waste sectors, which is really powerful in terms of how it gets used. And we also do a lot of collaborating on the action side as well, in terms of kind of getting our work done, and just kind of going back to that multi-stakeholder component, but also on kind of a pre-competitive basis. We do some work with industry in particular, as well as with industry and state and city, counties, different jurisdictions, where they're collaborating on a pre-competitive basis, and creating safe spaces where they can just openly talk about the challenges they're facing. And sometimes it's hard for them to come together or even find the right person or know who to reach out to in a peer company to say like, hey, I have an issue with dairy waste. Can I come hang out with you and talk about that? And that's something really, impactful that we're able to do with other partners, so even collaborating further on that. But that's just one example of something that we get to do at ReFed in terms of benefiting the sector through collaboration.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. And so I guess one of the things that we really try to strive at Covestro to do is to link the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, with either innovations, activities, our operations at our facilities, how we support the community. And so I'm interested in how do those sustainable development goals kind of guide your work within your different areas of expertise.
Well, we have 4 at Skanska that are actually, I have that pulled up right now from our website that we say directly reflect the work that we do. There's work and economic growth. So we actually see climate solutions and green building as a way to spur economic growth. We believe that for a long time. I think now we're starting to see that. Sustainable cities and communities, that's what we're building. Responsible consumption and production, that gets into using less and reuse and reduction in carbon emissions, and then climate action. So those are the 4 that we actually directly tie to, and that we actually look at our projects through when we're looking at what we're going to build.
Okay, cool. And I would say, and I'm also trying to be mindful of time too, I think some of those, I saw Katie, you shaking your head up and down. I think a couple of those definitely tied to both you and what NOAA are working on, correct? Or do you have any other ones that you're also in the back of your mind, you're thinking this is something we need to also focus on for our organization?
Yeah, ours is, it covers a lot, like Stacey said, but also just very specifically tied to 12.3, which is directly cutting food loss and waste in half globally. It's a little more nuanced than that, but that's the gist of it.
Okay, thank you very much. So we are running out of time. Any words of wisdom? I always ask the panel. Anyone want to throw anything out there in the last few seconds that we have?
Be a smart consumer, both professionally and personally.
See, there's always someone that has a way to just tie it all together, right? Thank you, Stacey.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Check your fridge before you go shopping. Make a shopping list. It's very easy.
And I do need to do that. So I want to thank all 3 of you for participating. I learned a lot. I did print out both of those reports, so I'll be looking at those as well to get some more information. Thank you very much for your time and for joining our THINC30 event. And I wish you all the best. Bye-bye.
Hi, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much, Alita, Noah, Katie, Stacey. That was a great conversation. And thank you so much to all of our speakers. I know I often say this at the end of all of our events, but wow, just great conversations. People are doing such transformative, impactful work. And I took some notes like I always do. And I wanted to just go over some of the themes that I heard today. Collaboration. There is a lot of collaboration going on, and that's fantastic. But I also heard we need even more and greater collaboration. We need training on systems thinking, because goals only work when it's systems. I thought that was a really good discussion and a really clear path with what we need to do moving forward. We need more stakeholder involvement, something very important as well. We need disruptive, transformative ideas. I really like that one, and we heard that twice today. Really impactful, disruptive ideas. That's really what's going to create the change. And I really liked social and environmental justice must be part of the circularity discussion. This is why we do THINC30, because it's based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and because it's all inclusive. of social and environmental and economic and everything in between and how it all works together. So I really liked that somebody did bring that up in the conversation today. Lauren Phipps, she talked about how business is driving circularity, driving discussions, doing great transformative work. But really what struck me today is there's so much opportunity, so much out there in every sector, in every community, in every corner of what we're doing. So we have a lot of opportunity to keep this great work going, but it's not just the companies, it's cities, it's communities, it's NGOs, it's academia, and everyone, every individual in between. There's a role for all of us to play in helping us become more circular. Before I go into some closing notes, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. For those of you that are new to THINC30, we're really glad to have you. For those of you that return from past THINC30s, we're glad that you came back. I want to apologize for the technical difficulties in starting the day with my opening remarks, and also for those that may have had trouble getting onto Zoom because of capacity limits. We'd think a year and a half into this pandemic, we'd have this technology thing down, but that's the beautiful thing about technology. Just when you get comfortable, it lets you know it's still in charge. A couple of things. You're going to get a survey a little bit later today, very brief. We asked if you could fill it out and provide us feedback on today and our speakers. You're also going to get a link, not today, but at some point, that will have information, the whole video of today. For those of you that had to join late because of technical issues or didn't get to get on at all, the whole day has been recorded. So we'll send you a link with information on past THINC30s, takeaway reports, and the video from today. So we hope that you'll be able to visit that. And again, we're just so happy you could join us. This is really important work for Covestro to do. But more importantly than just showcasing the work that we're doing is really to bring great people like you together to talk about how we can continue to work together to tackle some of the world's greatest issues. So thank you and have a great day.